Hello, and welcome to our Tuesday evening workshop. It's our pleasure to have Superintendent Langlis here, and he will kick things off for us in just 1 second.
Or two, or three.
Pleasure to have the school committee here too. Thank you all for your service.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight. Behind me, you see some of the team from Lewiston Public Schools. I also call them my fact checkers. They do a pretty good job of letting me know if I'm missing something, or I may turn and look at them for an answer to a question that you may have. Thank you.
It's also a pleasure to have the school staff here as well. Thank you so much.
We want to walk you through just briefly the process. So essentially, in December, we have a conversation with our district leadership, our principals, our directors, and we ask for them to start gathering things for the budget. What do they think they need to work to make the best use of the resources we do have to meet our most vulnerable kids and continue to build that pathway for students? They share that information back to us, and we start building a budget. Budget that I get at that point in time is far bigger than the one you have before you today. But I'm also very mindful of our community and the resources that we need to do the best we can for our kids, but also know that there's a tax component to that. That budget is then considered the superintendent's budget. So I make some reductions, and I work with the team to put together a package, and then we start sharing that with the school committee. They spend the better part of 5 weeks working on just budget workshops, looking at the different detail and all the different articles. School budgets are built in articles because of the referendum and also the state accounting structure. So where we are at right now is the school committee has done some work. If you wouldn't mind looking at the sheet with the blue and white lines here. These are some of the resources we want to provide you updated information last week, but we had no power for a couple of days and no internet in many locations too, as you know. So not necessarily to walk through this whole list, but so you have an idea of what are some of the things that the school committee had to make very difficult decisions on as it relates to reductions, things that we had proposed in our budget that we know our kids need as we work to try to find that balance between the local responsibility of the cost and what we know our kids need. Another metric that we continue to put in was based on what is the reality of the labor market today. So one example at the bottom of page 1, you see special ed clinicians. There's a number of them there that have been reduced. Please know we have a number that have been included in the budget that are new, that are needed. But I had to try to thread reality with the ask of knowing that counselors right now are hard to find. And so we value them. We've kept our counselor line whole, and we've added to it for special ed purposes. But again, these reductions you see here are things that our team really felt that they needed to continue to program best for kids, but we just couldn't fit all these things in the budget. So if you want to reference that list, you get into the bottom of page 2, you can see the reduction of $3.739 million from the initial superintendent's version of the budget. Again, my version had millions of dollars cut out of it from principals and directors, and so this product is significantly less than what our folks think we need to do right by our kids. But again, we'll work to do the best we can with the resources we do have. I do have some slides to guide the conversation. As always, we shared in the joint meeting that we had with you a while back our themes and goals to improve instruction systematically, improve our special education structure, to improve programming, grow pathways to graduation, maintain equity, social, emotional, and coping skills development efforts, school safety, stability, and communication. Those are not prioritized. Those are just all the things that continue to rise to the top as the most important things that anchor the work that we do. So challenges and just factors we want to make you aware of in our budget process. Our state of Maine subsidy formula has increased The problem is it doesn't keep up with the pace of contracts, insurances, and inflation. Our career and technical education programs have seen a growth in subsidy, which is wonderful. We're a big fan of our CTE programs. But note that we've added programs in the new high school over in Auburn. So the CTE programs that are in Auburn are actually under our umbrella. And we are working with area superintendents on their pieces of the subsidy for that model. And we have some benefits from it, but we are the region center here in Lewiston. So the folks that are overseeing those programs and the teachers in them are Lewiston Public Schools staff. Our multilingual supports, which is a specific area in our funding formula, have grown substantially this year, which is paired directly to the number of growing enrollments. So we have students that are coming in that are requiring multilingual services. The subsidy has gone up, but as it comes in, it's going out. I think it's the right thing, but we've grown the number of teachers we have for multilingual students. We've also grown in what I'm calling cultural brokers, who do good work with liaison between families and schools and helping to facilitate the many languages that we have. We also have a lot of high needs, and that requires good support. And so part of what we'll be sharing tonight is our goal around improving what we do from a special education services perspective, but knowing that's going to be a multi-year approach and a piece of work that will, I think, have a good return on investment, but it's going to be a challenge to get there, and I'll speak more about why. Our facilities have needs that we continue to address. I take pride in being mindful of our facilities and not letting them just go by the wayside. I think our schools and our community are assets. I want them to be used as much as possible, but I want to make sure that we're maintaining them. We have some projects in the pipeline that are just absolutely necessary to happen, and nothing is going down in cost. So we're doing the best we can with what we have there. And also, I refer to ESSER, but just for conversational purposes, it's different batches of money we received from the federal government in support of the COVID effort to get back to school safely. There were a lot of provisions around how those funds could and could not be used. We tried to work and navigate those to benefit our community and our schools, especially our HVAC, and some additional supports for students so that our buildings would last longer without asking for local dollars. Again, still a tax dollar, but those ESSER funds have run their course. So they are coming due in September coming up, and everything has to be invoiced and in place by that date. One project of note right now is we are changing the entire control system in every classroom at the high school and replacing all of the roof units from an HVAC mechanical perspective. That's all ESSER funds. It's a good thing to leverage to keep a building that is probably going to last a long time going with a more modern system. So again, we tried to leverage those to be as smart about the COVID piece as we could be, but really thinking long-term on things that will save us money and keep our buildings afloat for a longer period of time. Last year, we cut 61 positions in the proposed budget, and we are unable to do that this year. You can see the list that I shared with you from earlier. It's still pretty long, but last year we cut 61 positions, and if we do that again, it's people, it's teachers, it's educators, it's people in classrooms, and that has all kinds of impacts that we want to be really trying to avoid.
And just for clarity's sake, if I remember right, the 61 positions, not all of them were filled at the time, correct?
Many of them were either vacant or we had a vacant position that they could transfer into.
Right.
We did work to protect those who were employed with us. Yeah. Our out-of-district costs to send students to special purpose private schools continue to grow. Little context there, those are our high-need students that we can't program for in-house, whether it's because of our facility needs things it doesn't have, or we don't have the staff or the space in the school. We can't run certain programs. We do house and run what we call nested programs for 190 students. So it's not a new concept. We're doing this work. We just want to grow it so we can find ways to save money down the road. Excuse me. Contractual increases, we have multiple unions that we negotiate with and work with, and there's steps and raises and negotiation processes are happening, and that's all going up. Inflation has hit everyone. Healthcare and insurance costs for the school's level of contribution has increased. We've gotten some final numbers around that we didn't know before some of the conversations, so that may play in. What we'd like to see it play in as is a reduction in use of fund balance, which is a strategic approach to using money that was unspent to start your budget. Right now, we're using $5 million in fund balance to start our budget. That is a bad long-term plan, because when that $5 million isn't there, you either have to raise it instantly, or you have to reduce by it instantly. So we're trying to find a way to get back to a healthy balance and use of fund balance. We also have added we had proposed 2 school resource officers to add. The school committee believes strongly in the safety of students, and through some hard work of theirs, landed at adding 1 this year and seeing what other resources might be out there to do more work around that. So as I mentioned, the positions that are requested were requested based on needs. Another key area is our substitutes, who do a phenomenal job for us, helping us stay afloat in this hard labor market. But our substitute lines have run in excess of our budget. We have been able to use those federal dollars to support that, and again, in September, that goes away. The anticipation of the CDS, or Child Development Services, coming online, I don't think that's for next year, but we have to start thinking about taking over that process at some point. The state is working on language in a multi-year approach to phase it in statewide, and we'll see what details come of the rulemaking from that. But again, space, specialty services, things like that, we have to be mindful of. And just as a note for our community, that $72.6 million of our proposed budget is directly from state subsidy. And the budget that you have before you that's been updated has a $10.1 million of additional requests, which is up 9.94% over last year. That does include adult education, which by process lands separately of our articles, but it's all part of the same referendum process. We have space concerns now, and more are projected. Our space concerns exist at every one of our schools currently, except for McMahon. McMahon is a community, it's a neighborhood school model. Not a lot of kids go to McMahon from other parts of the city, or where they do come from other parts of the city. You have mature homeowners or renters that don't have school-age children. So we're looking at a bubble at like Montello that's bigger, and looking at how we either disperse students to those other spaces, which might shift their community school because of space, which is a need. Looking at other models down the road, and being mindful of things like the Wedgwood phase-in project, which is, I think, great for our city, but it's also a place where people can move in and bring their kids, and they're gonna wanna go to school, and we wanna make sure we have a place for them to have a classroom space. So we're thinking ahead with those related projects. So some fixed cost increases. I just wanna share some unfunded mandate components. And I'm not picking one side or the other on the stance of these projects, but just to know that from a bottom line perspective, these do have an impact. So the paid family medical leave has been approved, and the state is in the process of building a pool of funds so that can be accessed in the future. The cost of Lewiston Public Schools in year 1 is only for half of the year, and it's $282,000. So that will go to the pool. So again, as an organization of our size, we have to pay into that. With that 282, it's actually 382, but we project that because of the way the law was written, it's my understanding that we can deduct it from a paycheck just like you would anything else. So it'll be part of people's payroll. I anticipate groups wanting to negotiate whether or not that comes out of their payroll. So at this point, we budgeted for it, and that's, again, $100,000 less than the mandated amount, but we'll see how it lands. The special purpose tuition in SEED. In SEED, again, is that reimbursement model of when people have billable services. A vast percentage of, or a big percentage of it's paid back by the federal government, and a smaller percentage is paid back by state. When we have kids attending these special purpose schools outside of our district, we pay tuition for them to go there. We pay for their transportation to go there and get home. At times, we have to pay for the specialty services that they receive while they're there, depending on the scenario. But then the special purpose school can bill for reimbursement to the state and federal government. When the state gets their portion of the reimbursement, Lewiston Public Schools pays for it. It's where the student resides that actually lands with that bill. So we pay tuition, we pay to get them there, get them home, we pay for some of the services at some of the schools, and there's variables. And we also pay the main care seed. And as you can see in that bullet, the special purpose tuition and main care seed is approaching a $3 million increase in this 1 year alone. That's actuals. That's not a projection. That actually happened this year. We did last year create a reserve for $1 million. And if we have to tap that reserve, which we might have to, that would be back before you by process. The school committee has to approve use of that, as do you. But with those increases this year, we may have to come back and ask for those dollars to be used. That money was set aside as part of the budget. The minimum wage is still a conversation. The teacher minimum wage, which is projecting to push up. Ed tech and other school staff minimum wage, there's a ratio they're using, or I should say a percentage. If approved, that ed techs would be paid 150% of the minimum wage, and other school staff personnel would be paid, I think it's 125%. I'm looking at my fact checkers. I may have that wrong, I apologize, but it's a projection that we have to be mindful of, so if those rules change, we'll have to make those adjustments appropriately. In my experience, when those changes happen, it's not just those at the bottom of a scale that might get a bump that are interested in the bump. It's usually the whole scale that would like to have a conversation about, what their value is. And we value our educators. We do what we can with the resources we have, but that could have a compounding effect. And I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, because the other side of me says, we don't pay our teachers and staff enough. We just don't. As a society in general, that's my position. So some of these minimums that become unfunded mandates, we have to do it, but it starts to raise that bar of hopefully at some point in time recognizing our educators for the work that they do. Salary and benefits is a $6 million increase. That's with no new positions, and that's just contracts, insurance. So about roughly 70% of our organization is staff, and so when everybody gets their step or increases and the insurance projections shift, that's the cost for us. So to imagine for a second trying to do more with less always, I think schools are trying to do that everywhere. But when you shift, July 1, or when the contract turns over to the next year and everybody gets a percentage raise or steps, depending on the negotiation, that's a $6 million hit, and we haven't done anything different yet. Maybe compensating people better, but just by a series of steps, that just is there. But those segments alone count for over $10 million without inflation, additions, maintenance, things that break that we didn't anticipate, what have you. Special education, which I've touched on a lot, has been a primary focus, I think, this year, amongst other things, but really a primary focus of that tuition and seed cost is truly not sustainable. The problem we have is we have to provide for these kids no matter what. They're ours, we own them. So if we tuition them, that's the cost in this lane. And if we don't tuition them, well, we have to have the space, the facility, and the staff to educate them. And so either way, when we have these two lanes happening, there's incurred cost, of course. You can't shift out of special purpose private schools until you have the spaces that can properly educate them locally. And so part of the work that we're doing, and I'll share a slide in a second, trying to show you how we want to tier up to this, is to think about what is our return on investment if we can invest in the structures now and the staffing now and the specialized training now. How do we deflect cost in the future because we're not sending those students elsewhere? But at some point we have to ramp up to that. I mentioned areas of increase, obviously special education, again, tuition and seed money. There are some position requests. There were a few things that people just felt they could not let go of. These were positions that were funded in ESER, include an additional dean at the middle school, some folks that specialize in reading interventions, and obviously growing our special education capacity. The idea that keeps kids home, I think it means a lot to me, but what it means to me is not the same as what the bottom line is. And I think if we get to that point of transition, it will improve the bottom line. But the idea that we put kids on a bus or a van and they ride an hour plus to a special purpose private school and then they get on a van and ride home, that doesn't feel like Lewiston is home to them. I think we can do better than that. I think if we do better than that, we can also deflect costs. So kind of the real part of me and the heart part of me equates those two things together. I think it's work we need to do, but it is an investment. And again, as a reminder, we're responsible for the care of these students, whether they're at home or their tuition and their transportation and services, no matter what. If we don't provide that, we end up with litigation, which is even more expensive. So this is my really bad attempt at a graphic to try to show you some of what we're thinking with this return on investment. And so what I couldn't equate necessarily specifically was the actual return, because every single kid is a unique situation. Not all special purpose private schools are as expensive as others. Not all services are expensive as others, et cetera. But just to give you a kind of a visual, to have a target for next year, over the next couple of years, to grow in-house programs by 50 students, and that's to get to 240. We currently have 190, and I think we can grow that with a little more support. If we invest around $3 million, I believe we can set up the spaces, the structures, and acquire the staff to, I think, program for 240, but be ready for a growth. And I want to be mindful that we don't grow our programs a little bit and then put so many kids in there it fails. So we want to be mindful of a multi-year approach. And the image above it is, it's not one of our schools, so nobody has to worry about that. I just took it off the web, but it's just the portion of a wing. So taking some classes, grouping those resources for that particular group of students in a part of a school. And then looking at years 2 and 3 and building out, grow those in-house programs by another 60 students to 300. And trying to project costs, which is hard to do in the future with so many economic factors, but to add 2.5 for a total cost of $5.5 million from year 1, not an additional 5.5, but adding them up. And then looking at it year 2, 3, having 300 students that, again, other than the 190 we already have, we're currently paying to go elsewhere. And then looking at a year 4, 5 target, 20 and 29, if we continue to invest, again, try to be mindful about building the transitions to have capacity for the next year of growth. Try to get to a goal of 350 students that we could provide services for in district, which will reduce a number of costs. So over that 3-year span, you're looking at an increase of money we're asking for locally. We used a number of $100,000. Every student has tons of variables, but $100,000 is a safe number to say what it costs to send a kid to another school and all the services and the transportation and the seed care and all that main care seed. But if you did, for 350 kids, program for them, it's a massive savings. We will always have kids that require special purpose private school. We will never, in my opinion, be able to program for every single kid. But the idea right now that we have 133 kids at a special purpose private school and approaching 60, I believe, on a waiting list last I checked. That's 200 students that we're going to spend that kind of money on to have them go elsewhere. Thank you. As a note, in this process, not necessarily in a sheet, is the LCIP. I just want to talk about that for a quick moment. Again, we try to work to ensure the space and the integrity of those spaces is the objective of our LCIP requests. And schools, by comparison, request a small amount. We have 11 buildings and over 5,000 students. And the LCIP, I think it's an important thing to note, even for those watching. LCIP it's a function of our budget. So when you look at debt service and our revenue sheets and our expenses, when LCIP items are approved, yes, they're bonded through a process, but we pay that mortgage bill as part of our budget, if that makes sense. So when we're asking for things, we're also saying we're prepared to sign for this mortgage. And so we are very conservative on those asks because eventually we get the bill. And by we, I mean Lewiston Public Schools directly in the budget annually. The LCIP request for Lewiston Public Schools this year was $1.7 million of the $59.5 overall. And I know not all that will move forward through process, but I just wanted to remind you that sometimes we get talking about, well, what are the totals as far as the debt as it's related to the ratios and what's permissible. Much of the school-funded items that are part of the LCIP whole, not the request for this year, but in the past, when you look at balances, are connected to referendums like the expansion of the high school or new buildings like Connors or expansion of Farwell or McMahon. So those are pieces that are all part of that process. And again, many of those approved by voter referendum, they still sit on our books and we still make that debt service happen. But just want to share that I get a lot of questions in the public about LCIP, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to share just a couple pieces there. So some other resources we did share with you via email, and I thank Tracy and Brian for sending things along, and Kathy. But we had no power and internet to update some things, so we were trying to just, I sat on the front steps of the high school last Thursday in my vehicle trying to use the Wi-Fi to send some things to you. So we got you some things, but the things I passed out today are updated now that we have power and internet. And I can go through them, or if you have questions about them, it's just kind of an update of what you had before. We did share in that packet an example of the seed costs. It's just a one-page narrative of how that functions and how that works. And we shared that revenue sheet, which shows prior years, and the revenue is just got to balance the expenses, so that's how that plays out. Happy to go through any documents that we've shared or answer any questions you have.
Yeah, we'll start in with some questions. Councillor Chittum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Superintendent, thank you. Could you go back 2 slides to the slide about private special education schools? That one. Are we talking about capital costs, or are we talking about annual costs? 3 million, 5.5 million, 7 million. In year 10, or 6, let's be realistic. In year 6, are we looking at an additional $7 million?
I think if we get to this phased approach, we'd be looking at a $7 million per year cost.
Yep. That
could be continued, of course, would be impacted by CBAs and what have you, but not a capital cost. This would be a people on the job cost. But I do think if we can grow to that capacity, the millions that we have saved, not sending kids elsewhere, this in sum pays for itself.
I agree. I misused capital. I meant startup costs versus ongoing costs. Sure. Thank you.
There may be some startup costs. As we look at this graphic, you got the piece of the wing, and then there's a building. What does that look like if we get to a point of capacity between CDS and bringing kids back home? They're going to need a space to use. So there could be some capital pieces to this as well.
Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions. One, staying in line with the seed. Obviously, we had talked to you the first time that if we were to develop a program, we might get students and make some money on that. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes. As it relates to the seed, it's money that's going out that if we provide those services, we actually bill the state and they reimburse us directly. So there can be savings there.
So billing the state, if we have our own, do we bill ourselves, or the state just call that a wash?
The state actually will reimburse us for the main care seed if we bill for it.
So by having, we actually have another revenue stream technically coming in that we're giving away now.
Yes.
And resource officer, you know the cost for the resource officer?
Yeah, I think it was around $75,000. What happens is we pay 75% of their salary. So it fluctuates by individual, but that's roughly what it costs us. And then PD employs them off school hours and summers and things like that.
I'd be for adding it back in because I think we have a need at the schools. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
What is total staff right now at Lewiston Public School? Like how many employees do you have?
I would have to check on the exact number right now, but
include yourself.
1,201.
1,200 staff.
But built into that, you have substitutes and temps and things like that. But we're over 500 teachers, ed techs, and the variable support. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
I mean, there are main towns that don't even have 1,200 people.
Correct.
So. And how many current vacancies do we have?
Vacancies are actually doing okay. I think we're in and around 20 teachers that we have vacant, and then ed techs I think is around 30. But that number is shrinking, and there may be more information behind me. I don't. Bill can look.
We got Bill on it.
Yeah.
While Bill checks that, Councillor Najin, did you have something?
Yeah, and so just again to verify, based on this model right here, we could see, depending on what the build at and the other pieces are required, but in the first year it could be basically a $2 million savings just for the program that we have in place, and then following that, we're now talking about $4.5 million in year 2, year 3, based on that model.
Yeah, potentially. If we aren't sending kids out, those funds never get paid out. And so yes, the seed and the travel. So there could be savings pretty quickly. I don't want to make too bold of a promise on next year, because I really think it's about framing and structure, getting people trained, having the classroom spaces available, any specialty equipment that needs to be placed in, or shifting the layout of a room, things like that, I think are things we want to really focus on year one.
And just as a note on the SROs, so I'm showing 83,000, which is 75% of the salary. I think it's probably going to hit right around 110, just like the other officers. And so we pay 25% of that piece so that we'd have, yeah, exactly.
We pay the whole thing anyways.
No, true, absolutely. Stevie differently though. And I do kind of agree with you. I think that school safety, especially with the SROs, is important, especially in this current environment that we find ourselves in post-October 25th, so.
Bill, did you have numbers for us? Yeah. Can you just, come on down, Bill. Yeah. Or over there works too.
So we have about 100 vacancies, but with that, some of those aren't as active as being open because we have permanent subs in those positions. So I would say we're probably around more in the 60 to 80 range of actual openings that we're actively looking for right now. So,
And roughly, what then, 1,200 employees?
yeah, employees is kind of an interesting number to come at because of the temporary employees. So we usually shoot around 1,300 is kind of the number that we talk about for total employees.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Superintendent, so I noticed here on the items that were cut was next step busing. Can you explain
Sure.
what that is and how these kids will get to school?
So right now, we have over 100 students enrolled at Next Step as part of a pathway for students. Right now, there's students in 7 and 8 doing a part of a different model, and then students 9 through 12 really trying to just support them as much as we can to get to that graduation and having a future plan perspective. So of those kids, some are in walking distance and it doesn't have an impact. The rest, we have kind of a plan B and a plan C. Plan B is kids walk up to the high school just prior to the high school dismissal so they can be there when the high school dismisses and they just get on the buses. That's fine most days, but when it's snowy or troublesome weather-wise, it can be tricky. Plan C, we do have a van there that Next Step uses to do whatever they need to do for instructional and educational purposes, so we can put kids in a van with our staff and get them home if we need to. The $79,000 that was reduced was to send really a dedicated band of buses citywide to Next Step, to the high school, and then also back home. So that was the estimate on adding that dedicated busing service. So Plan B is still working, but I think ultimately at some point we would like to be able to provide that transportation to make sure kids aren't looking at the weather and saying, I don't have a ride today, or trying to figure out what that ride is. The other anomaly that has popped up is if there's any kind of student injury and they take a bus, we have to get creative. But I think we figure it out, so that's a reduction that we felt like we could responsibly make while knowing we'd like to bus them.
And how many students are at the high school these days?
As of last Friday, we were at 1,400 students attending regularly, and we also have the Next Step students, another 100 students there that have some connection to the high school. And it doesn't count the 700 plus students that attend CTE programs in the LRTC wing that's also attached.
Oh, so some days there could be in excess of 2,000 students there.
If you want to add Connors, there could be 3,500 people on that campus on any given day.
Right. Yeah. Further questions from the council? Councilor Chittum.
Thank you. Not particularly germane to finance, but I'm curious about child development services. How young are children who first enter the CDS program?
I want to say 4 and 5, but there's some 3-year-old pieces too.
Come to the mic, please.
There's a crossover to what we facilitate and what we serve. Karen Paquette, Assistant
Okay.
Superintendent.
So
Mics are always on here.
CDS services students birth to 5, but we're responsible in this phase-in plan from the state. We would be responsible for 3 and 4-year-olds. So I say till 5 because once a student turns 5, they're usually in a kindergarten class, and then they become part of the public school programming. So we would be responsible for 3 and 4-year-olds.
And what are the criteria to be involved in this program? What constitutes putting a 3-year-old into the care of the Lewiston school system?
Do you want me to answer, Jake? So these students would be identified as a student who needed additional special education services. So whether that's speech, whether that's OT, whether that's PT, or it's a more comprehensive program for their development and for their education.
Thank you.
Just to throw in on that, a lot of times these students have their initial identification by parents at home and then a pediatrician that's saying, hey, we're seeing developmental delays of some sort, or things that maybe were or should have been more adaptive at this point. And so it's kind of like an early onset IEP to see if the interventions can support the growth and development of the student, even preschool age.
Counselor Najin.
Sorry about this, is a pretty direct question, but from what I'm understanding, the school committee and yourself feel that the cuts here are the only ones, like, these are the ones that you can make without sacrificing services and also building out for the future.
Yeah, and some of these were much harder to make than others. All hard, but yes, I think this represents really good work on the school committee's part to try to find a way to get toward a target of around a 10% increase.
And when I look at the breakdown, the mill rate, the school total is 14.96. Is that overall, what's the increase, I guess is the question?
Yeah, so that would be the overall. The increase is $2.25 on the existing. Last year it was $12.31.
$2.25?
Yes.
And the original proposal that came before us was somewhere in the $4 range, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And this one accounts also for building out for some of the program or being built from other communities.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Can you elaborate on the ELL language facility increase that was cut, 65,000?
I can. So we were trying to plan ahead. What's happened is we have a lot of enrollments over the summer, and we're trying to help families transition and orient themselves to school and what is school, and making sure they have a good connection right away so that we don't lose kids to the transition. So in the past, we have paid our language facilitators, but just during the school year. And so there was no one around in the summer to help with that facilitation effort. So what we've moved to, because of additional funding, because of our enrollment changes, we've moved to these cultural brokers, and it's a more dynamic role, but it's from different funding, but they're year-round. So with the new funding to support that effort, we were able to extract those funds from the year-round potential, because we have different year-round folks that we didn't have prior.
So am I to understand that this decrease here, or this cut, does not actually result in a cut in services?
Correct.
Okay.
It's actually the result of an increase in services through funding because of our enrollments. But with those new funds, we were able to, in my opinion, finally get to a place where we were better serving families with our liaisons, and that's those are the folks we're able to hire, our multilingual folks that can communicate with families directly. So before we knew we were going to get those funds and that they would be renewed, we had put in a $65,000 request in the budget to say we really need more help in the summer. But because of these new positions, that is an added resource, more so than that 65 would have provided. We were able to extract that from the budget.
Right. Do we still track what languages students speak and how many there are?
We do.
Well, what is that number?
Oh, boy. I think there's 34 that I know that we try to communicate in directly, and I believe that overall there's over 40, but if Director McElmore is watching now, she's going to let me know. But we communicate on a daily basis in many languages between tools, equipment, and interpretive services. And again, these new brokers that cover, I think, 7 languages.
Right. Thank you. Counselor Najin?
And just expand on that, because I know that Obviously, having folks in the community that speak multiple languages that are also connected to the communities that they're speaking to is probably a benefit overall. Is there a track for these folks to transfer into actual ELL teachers at some point in time? Is there an employment track there? And then also, as the follow-up, is there any crossover with the GA funding that we're doing with the work share and language services?
So we don't cross over directly with the GA component, to my knowledge. We may have talked to each other about some people who do a good job in either realm, who might be looking for work in the other. So we have had some crossover there. We have invested and tried to smartly direct others' investment in resources to help people on that pathway to becoming an educator. A lot of support right now at the community college level, the Alphon piece. The Department of Labor has gotten involved with some apprenticeship work, and we have our hands in all of those pieces, and we're trying to coordinate anyone who wants to become a teacher from any walk of life, from prior experience, prior credits, transcripts from anywhere. There's on-ramps for people who want to do that, and we're happy to support it. Right now, the funding is good to support people trying to become educators, so people can do it at low or no cost. And those are not all LPS dollars, but we are trying to facilitate and connect those dots for people.
Just as a follow-up, is there any partnership at all with anybody who's receiving any of the SUL funding?
Yeah, we work with probably a dozen different organizations that get SUL funding, and multiple organizations that work with Gorman. We try to leverage everything that we can, but we also have tons of great community resources that they knock on our doors and say, hey, how can we help? And we always try to work with people on that.
Councillor Sol.
Hi. I see you have special ed summer school, $72,000 cut. Does that mean there's no longer going to be that program?
So that's actually based on an actual. So we went back multiple years, and part of these reductions are how much do we actually spend versus how much have we been budgeting? And so that reduction is based on an actual. We're projecting out the cost for transportation and then respective services, and our new contracts that are coming into play. But we believe that we can take that money out of the budget safely and still provide summer school.
Okay. Because I personally, I have seen it's really important for them to continue through the summer, so it's not such a stressful moment when they have to go back. So for them to be able to stay in summer school, I think that's important.
Yeah, and we have over 1,000 kids that attend summer school on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Councillor Chittum.
Thank you. What is Article 5 restructuring, cutting that to save $170,000?
Yeah, so a couple of different pieces there. We are exploring some ways to do it. So Article 5 is student services and things that we provide that may not land in a classroom. So one of the things that's in Article 5 would be like our partnership with the store next door. So we compensate two people to help facilitate that space, and the store next door nonprofit, they raise funds, they get resources, they help distribute them. They're also a good contact with the community to identify students who have different levels of need, and they really help try to facilitate that. So that's one example of the things that were part of that, not reduced, by the way, but just to give you an idea of what Article 5 components are. But some of the other ways that we can look to reduce in places like that are how many nurses do we have, and what else can you do around nurses? So one example is if you shift the model to have a nurse that's in charge, you could have someone who's otherwise trained to do things like pass meds, light first aid, things of that nature. So as a district, we have multiple floating nurses. So every school has its own nurse, and then we have some that can cover different things. We also have substitute nurses. And so one of the things we're looking at in a model for potential savings is shifting to that otherwise trained person that could operate underneath a nurse, but it might save you the nurse salary and still provide the service and still have the human capacity to cover the challenges, but to transition to something that's less expensive. So those were the ideas around how to reduce that particular area of cost.
Thank you.
You mentioned that some of the cuts were harder than others. You were talking about this?
Yeah.
So what were some of the harder cuts in your mind?
You asked me to prioritize. I think all of them, but I think anytime we have a position that's filled. We're looking at reducing an elementary teacher based on enrollments. So I use that language on purpose for some discretion, but that's a person that works for us. Now, could they transfer?
This top line,
top
elementary
line.
teacher enrollment base, like, that's an actual person employed right this second.
Correct.
Right.
And so now,
Enrollments are down, is that what you're saying?
well, in that particular area, some of the numbers are down, so we could hopefully find them employment in another vacant position. It might require them to change buildings. There's a lot of impacts when we start reducing some folks. I think, I'm just kind of sliding down, all of these things were tough, but you get to things like the language facilitator increase, which was a reduction because we found a better service that we could provide in a different revenue stream, so that's that reduction. The special ed CDS coordinator, I know that CDS is not going to be upon us this coming school year necessarily because of the transition the state's working with, but we still have 80 to 100 kids a year. And who facilitates all of those IEPs, all of those transitions, all of those services? We don't have someone that does that. So multiple people pick up that workload. That was a hard one to reduce by. Again, they're all hard. Some of the harder ones too were based on the realities of the labor market. So when we look at special ed teachers or reading recovery, these are people that have a direct impact on students every day when they're there. And reducing by them, whether they're filled or not, is taking away that chance for a young person to read or have appropriate services to that level. And so those are all hard things to do. Some of the other components, when we reduce things out of facilities or buildings and maintenance, I'm always mindful of, I don't want to just put paint on a wall and say it's new. I want to make sure things are structurally sound. Over the last year or two, we've invested in the floors at the high school because they were peeling up. There was a joke amongst seniors last year that they were collecting floor tiles and getting someone to sign them and keeping them as mementos. And I'm thinking, this is terrible, right? And so when you look at that back wing of the high school now, the floor's been redone. It's nice, it's welcoming, and I want kids and adults to feel like not only is this a great school and a beautiful set of diversity and learning opportunity, but that it's something they can be proud of. And I think, I succumb to the psychology or the sociology of if you have a nice space, it'll be better kept. And I think that that's an important thing to do, but not just to prettify it, or I don't think that's even a word, I apologize. But don't just make it look good, actually have it be nice. And I think it will be taken care of and treated well, and I think that's important to do. So when we have roof leaks and ceiling tiles that are wet, and so it's little things like we'll patch what we can, the bigger projects on the way, like at McMahon, the engineering is starting to happen because that roof can't just be fixed and replaced as is. It actually has some structural components that are needed to do that. But that's work that takes time. But in the meanwhile, I don't want to walk down the hall and see buckets, and I don't want to look up and see water stained, ceiling tiles. So we do what we can to try to mitigate some of that stuff. All of these things are really hard to cut, but I think any position that has a person in it, and again, with last year cutting 61 positions, this year cutting these, we are on that bubble of a future cut can't be backed by the statement of, but we're hopeful this vacancy will work for you. That vacancy won't even exist.
Thank you, Superintendent. Counselor Najin, did you have something?
Yeah, I have a few things, and I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So the projection level 2 is what's actually made it into the budget as far as the breakdown on the budget totals by cost center 2024, 25.
Are you looking at this?
Yeah, so that is correct. Okay, so
I want to make sure I'm looking at the same page you are.
I just want to speed date over a few of these things here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I show that there's a substantial increase in high school ELL from the city revised budget to projection level 2. Is that an expense that, am I reading that correctly? We're going to go up like 57%?
Yep, so that's a big addition of teachers, because
That's teachers, okay.
enrollments jumped by almost 200 this fall, and we had a pretty big influx of students that needed multilingual services. That's
Okay.
teachers. Yep.
Gotcha. And so ELL, it says HS, but I assume that's Longley?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same thing, new teachers?
Mm-hmm.
And with administration, that's, I assume, positions for them?
So administration growth there would just be probably contract or steps.
Okay. And I can follow up with some emails too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of like high level figure out where some of these, the substantial increases, if you could just give a little like explanation behind them. So the SE Health Service, PT K to 8, looks like we went from $2,500 in the budget to $40,000.
Yeah, some of these things are adjustments for actuals, and some of them are connected to our growth of investing in this phased-in approach.
Gotcha. There's the LRTC drafting design, that's to grow the program, I assume?
What's the number you have there? I'm looking at today's sheets. I
So
think
it's,
you're looking at
the
last
city
week's sheets.
revised budget was 98,815.77, and then the projection level 2 was 139,383.
I just want to make sure I'm looking at the same.
And again,
Can
I can follow up with like an email to get the specifics for the lines.
What page is that?
Yeah, it's here. So it's page 4. Yep. And like I said, I can email these to you too. You can follow, if you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine, but I'm just curious as to certain pieces, like the LRTC EMT in Auburn, there's an expense there, and so do we pay an EMT from Auburn? Is that how that works?
So we have an EMT program that students attend.
Okay.
It just happens to live in Auburn, even though it's our programming. Yeah.
Gotcha, okay. And then the only other, I think there was one or two other ones that I had just kind of a general question about. Health services at Farwell went from about 100,000 to 170,000. Is that staff or is that programming or?
Yeah, I want to check to make sure I give you the accurate detail.
Okay.
I did bring that back with me, but something like that is often a medically fragile student requires a med tech. So you have an additional staff that moves kind of with the kid as required. So that's where you could see a jump in medical services.
Okay, and the last two ones, and like I said, I'm gonna email you these two. But school committee, the expenses went up, and is that because we changed the pay for school committee?
Part of it is pay, and then there's also insurance costs that lands on the school
Insurance,
committee.
okay.
So when you have the non-people related insurance, so more facilities related things, it connects back.
Those are really the ones that stood out to me. So I'll email.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And if you could just possibly share a breakdown on some of those, that'd be great.
Counselor Chittum.
Thank you. The school resource officer, you've proposed, or not proposed, but reluctantly removed $83,000 from the budget to take care of 3/4 of an SRO. Do you have a place? Is there a place, a school, or is this a floating position, a middle school? Where is the resource officer not?
So the reduction was we had added 2 that we didn't have. So we had 3. We proposed to add 2 to make it 5, and then ultimately reduced by 1. So it's still an add of 1.
Okay.
But placement-wise, we're looking at the elementary level. We have 5 elementary schools and only 1 SRO that works in and around those students, 1 at the middle school, 1 at the high school. And I think our SROs, while they do a great job, I think there could be, if we fell into a grant, I would welcome more support from SROs in our community.
Thank you.
Counselor Roy.
Thank you. Couple of things. Teacher laptops, have you found an alternative source to get laptops for the teachers?
No, we have not. This is a refresh effort, and so we might have to scale back how many people get refreshed, and continue to look for ways, grants, funding. But no, I don't have any promises on how to do that refresh without those dollars.
LRTC operation of building, 70,000, are you reducing?
Yeah, so some of that was based on actuals from last year. And we're hopeful that things like the control system being upgraded and whatnot, we may find some savings in operations. But that one was more heavily on actuals. It was funds that weren't used. And we worked to maximize our subsidy in Article 3 items, but that was based on an actual.
And I'm glad, because that program, like the LRTC program, is amazing.
Yeah.
Another thing, equipment. What equipment, $100,000 are you?
So that ends up being a challenge. So equipment can cross a whole spectrum of things. You could have equipment for facilities, for maintenance. You could also have equipment that's in classrooms and things of that nature. So we have to go through and find what things we can extract or go without for now. And so some of that equipment you might see, like classroom furniture upgrades, things of that nature. We try to be real intentional about what we do, but when we're trying to find this level of reduction, a little bit comes from lots of places.
And I know some of that equipment is kind of badly needed in some areas, right? And this is kind of a hard cut, like you were saying before, right?
Yeah, definitely a hard
Thank
cut.
you.
Counselor Glant.
Thank you, Mayor. If you do find new computers, we wouldn't mind the leftovers over here in the council, because we got some dinosaurs ourselves.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll keep that in mind.
Counselor Najin.
Sorry to come back to this, but thinking about the SROs, and you had named basically one more at the elementary school and then possibly one at the middle, another one at the middle school or one at the high school?
No, so we existing have one at the middle school, one at the high school, and one that goes to
Loads,
all elementary schools and does a little bit of programming with them and trying to build relationships. So the initial budget I had submitted to the school committee asked for 2 additional, and through some compromise and good work, they landed at 1 additional. So this is actually a growth of 1 position to make it 4 in the district, what initially I had asked for 5.
Where would that SRO go, I guess, is the
That's
question, at the
the one
elementary
that
school?
I would have them work at the elementary level. between
Okay.
buildings.
The reason why I'm talking about this is I'm just thinking about the Connors and high school campus in and of itself, as well as some of the trails that come up to the property. And I'm wondering, is there any opportunity, maybe not working directly with the police department and the children in the schools, but is there any opportunity to look at like maybe some type of security component that could be built out, just considering the openness of the campus and also some of the pressures that occur, particularly along the trail?
So one of our SROs is primarily located at Connors currently. That's the elementary one, who is not able to get out as much to the other schools, which is a concern. I think all schools would prefer to have some presence. So that's the reason for that ad. We do have a pretty dynamic and recently upgraded and continuing to be upgraded camera system that does patch in with LPD so they can see and do surveillance. And I have no benefit from the plug, but I would say that LPD's response time to our schools when we make a call or reach out is phenomenal, and we're very appreciative of that. So they get to places they need to be in a hurry if that's what's needed.
I don't know if you remember, Superintendent, but there's a lot of discussion around the SEL position last year. Where is that? What happened to that? Do we have an SEL director? Where are we at?
So we went through a hiring process this year, and we found who we thought was the right candidate for that role, and ultimately they declined. And as time ticked on, we've looked at other ways to facilitate SEL within each school instead of having a director. So we're looking at an implementation plan with committee work instead of having that position. So that was one of those Article 5 reductions that's come out of the budget. So there's no director, but we do have someone in each of our elementary schools.
And presumably each of these someones are busy with their current position, correct?
Yes.
Right, so it would be like extra if they had time.
No, these folks, this is what they do. They work on social emotional learning. That's
Like
their
dedicated
job.
to
Yep.
that in each school?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think we still have one vacant, but we're working to fill that. So it shifted the approach a bit from a more expensive district person to a on-the-ground group of folks who are working to implement. And again, we found some grants that were connected, some of those fundings to, some local, some title, so we pushed it together. It's definitely something I'm passionate about and in favor of.
Thank you. Further questions from the council? Were you looking up something, Bill, or are we all set?
I'm just anticipating your questions.
Oh, okay.
Bill has-
I saw you working furiously back there and didn't.
Bill,
the spreadsheets we get to open at.
Yeah.
between Sue, Bill, Karen, and Adam, there's probably 30 tabs open with information ready just in case. And they're quick to let me know tomorrow morning if I misspoke on anything,
As they should.
as they should.
Counselor Najin, did you have something?
I just wanted to say that I want to thank you, the school committee, and everybody involved in this process. The original budget obviously was wealthy, reducing the overall costs while considering build out in order to reduce costs for us in the long term and give better educations to folks that live in our community. I think is very valuable. And I'll email through the specific questions that I have so that, to the school committee and yourself, so that I can just understand those line items
Yeah,
better.
absolutely appreciate it. And if I think you have it, but don't say it out loud, if you want to give me a call, I think everybody has my number. Want to make sure that you have all those questions answered and making sure I'm looking at the same line that you are, because I said things last week, but I printed the updated things today, and I should have brought last week's and I didn't. So when I'm like, I'm not looking at the same thing he is on page one, so we could take care of that, for sure. And thank you for your grace with just sending me an email so we can get you that information.
Counselor Glant?
Thank you, Mayor. This is more directed towards our deputy over there. Can we put things on a table from here? Like, if we think we want to add a position back in, or we have some doubts of some things that are here, would we discuss that at a table item further down the line? How does that work my first year here? So I'm curious.
Well, are you talking about adding something into the school committee's
Yes.
budget? Yeah, we can't tell them what to do. We only can tell them final number. We can give them suggestions as a city
Okay,
council,
that's-
but that would be up to Jake and,
Okay, that's what I wanted to try to figure out. Thank you.
Just to chime in too, is if there are things that you feel passionate about that you want added back in or want to share that information, I would say talk to the folks that are your corresponding school committee members, and/or reach out to me, because if I hear from multiple of you that you would like to see this in there also, I think that's things I can take back to the committee. They would have to re-vote on it. Ultimately, we still need your approval, which is scheduled for the end of April, I think on the 29th, so maybe the 30th. But it's good to know those things before that day, so we can get back in front of you if needed with any kind of changes. But once that vote happens, because the referendum is early May, so the turnaround time for us, for your next scheduled meeting where you actually vote on this particular portion of the budget, is fast-moving for us. And if we are unable to get things through at the end of April, it can delay the referendum. Then I start to panic, because I don't have a budget to work with. So if you have thoughts like that, I'm happy to take them or share them with the school committee, so we can be incorporating what we can to the best of our ability. But ultimately, from my perspective, the school committee has that decision-making power, and then it comes to you for your approval, and then obviously the voters. One thing I do want to add that has been talked about and approved by the school committee is to look at using fund balance. We've built a large fund balance over the last few years because we've been trying to leverage the federal relief dollars to the best of our ability. But because of that, we have I think a pretty healthy fund balance, but there are also restrictions that are going to come back into play in about 12 months with fund balance can only be at 5%. Right now, we have leeway. And part of the thinking is to create a reserve, much like we did last year for special education, of $3 million for facilities use. So that would be using fund balance. It will require your approval. On that date, part of what we'll be sharing is this budget or any modifications that happen between now and then, approved by the school committee, and a request to start that reserve of $3 million for facilities use. If you approve of that, it goes to referendum, so it has to be approved at the referendum level. So just want to make sure you're aware of that other piece.
Counselor Najin?
Just so I understand the fund balance piece, so you're saying we have $5 million in fund balance, is that correct?
So in this current budget, you have a starting amount of $5 million in fund balance. This would be an additional 3 for the use of 8 to start the budget. My concern with fund balance over a multi-year perspective is anytime you start your budget with a particular number, you need it next year to start, or you have to raise it, or you have to reduce by it. So starting our budgets with $5 million, to me, is a concerning number. It's okay for a year or two, but I think in year 3, I'm very concerned that that number is going to have to be reduced. One idea that I have in mind, but the school committee hasn't had a chance to meet, so surprise. We got our insurance number back, and it's projected a little bit lower than we thought. And I think between, finding accuracy in lines as we go through the final version, and any savings from things like the insurance rate that we projected versus what the actual is, which we didn't get till last week. My goal would be to reduce the use of fund balance in the actual budget, so that we're not depending on that next year.
In the full $5 million that you have right now is going to this year's budget, is that correct? Or do you you said something about 5%. I just want to understand how much you leave out.
So 5% of the prior year's budget is the state rule, if you will, on how much fund balance you can have. So in a $100 million budget, the cap that we can keep is 5%. So when you get into that threshold of making sure we are in a healthy place financially, because you can't run an organization this size without some funds in the coffers, but using those coffers to have your budget annually is the problem. So we want to draw back from that. And I think past councils have said, or had some thinking around, well, if we have fund balance, let's use a little more of it to reduce the local tax burden. So that's why you get into that space. But I think it'd be more sound financially if we can get that fund balance usage down to 2, maybe 3, which might be more operational of unspent funds from the prior year for an organization our size, and not something that we will look up and say, well, we need 5, but there's only 2, so we have to have $3 million of ask without doing anything.
Thank you.
You mentioned, I forget what school you were talking about, maybe it was the high school, but enrollment was up. How much, is enrollment up across the entire district, and if so, how much?
Yeah, our enrollment's up. We're in and around 5,600 students right now. Last year, we were under 5,200, and then it fluctuates. So we have a pretty mobilized student population, but things seem to have settled down. There are, coming out of COVID, a lot of students who were homeschooled and things of that nature. So I don't know how much of it is a bit of a rebound from people who were being homeschooled, who said, it's time to go back to school, the environment's more safe, or what the other factors are. But I know housing is more or less full in Lewiston, so I anticipate a growth in enrollment based on more available housing, which is going to come online, as you know. So.
Thank you. Counselor Chittum.
Thank you. Superintendent, you indicated, or Bill indicated, staff of 1,300. How many are direct instructional?
I heard him say it. It's about 600 folks that are working directly with kids in the teaching and learning capacity.
So a little less than half of the total staff is direct instruction. Okay. I realize this metric probably
Hold
doesn't.
on. Bill's coming up to correct.
Okay.
Bill to the rescue.
There's a lot of discourse back here. So the 600 is certified professionals, so that would be teaching staff, and then probably another 400 for the ed techs. So that, then you're looking at about 1,000 of directly working with students, staff.
I like that a lot better than 600. The follow-up, I realize that the metric has a lot of nuances in it, but where does Lewiston stand in teacher-student ratios with other districts in Maine?
So our student-to-teacher ratio is comparable, but every time we make these reductions, those per pupil in a classroom ratios go up.
You're not reducing students, you're reducing faculty.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
the
that-
kids
that-
are going to show up.
That's math.
Right, but paired with that is also the space, and so when you can't hire teachers, you need subs, so that's why we have so many substitutes and part-time folks Also in that metric that Bill shared is, every school has a cafeteria and a nutrition team. Every school has, daily custodial and maintenance needs. We have some folks in the district that try to facilitate those things. Our maintenance folks could be anywhere in the district at any time doing whatever they can. So it's that whole component. It's a big operation.
Thank you.
Counselor Najin.
And just on the same, well, actually, it's slightly different, and it's not directly budget related. But I mean, in a way, it is. As far as the graduation rate, both graduation and then getting secondary, a certification, as opposed to holding a diploma, where are we at right now, and what's the track in the past? Like, I know during COVID we had a lot of difficulties, and I'm just I want to get an idea of where we're at and what we expect to be at in the next couple of years.
So we typically float around the 75% range over the last decade or so. Certainly working to improve that with different pathways for students. The COVID effect is real, and I think it was very real for some students who were trying to graduate high school when COVID happened. What we're seeing, at least from my perspective, is it's even more real for kids who missed a lot of education late elementary. Well, those students are now getting into high school. And school is very challenging for them because of the gaps. And it's not just, cognitive things. It's the social interactions. It's the technology. There's so many factors into whatever that gap was for each individual kid. So we continue to try to build around them and support them. I'm a strong believer in you have to have high expectations, but we got to do everything we can do to get kids across that line. If they don't have a diploma, they are in trouble for the rest of their lives. We have to continue to work those angles.
Anything further you'd like to add, Superintendent?
I just thank the staff. What they do every day is just amazing. I have 2 kids in the school system, one high school, one middle school currently, who went through a couple different elementary schools, and so it's personal for me, but not just professional. And I love our community. Our staff does a great job. So we want to continue to grow that staff and support our kids, keep them home and have a good experience, and keep celebrating those milestones that keep pouring out of our schools, with kids going to Ivy League schools, approaching 100 championships, just the community connectedness, our diversity. We have a great thing going. I want to keep this train moving forward and keep doing the good work. But my closing piece would just be to thank the team that I work with. They're great people, and to thank our staff who show up for work every day and take on whatever the kids bring in with them and try to make it a good experience for them. So.
I thank you for that, and I agree. My son goes to the high school, and I appreciate all the teachers that teach him. So, thank you.
Might be appropriate for applause right now. Thank you. Thank you, all of you in the educational field.
And this concludes our budget workshop. You all have a wonderful evening. Good night, Lewiston.
General session.
Thank you.
We have review, oh, that's tomorrow.
Do you want it in email?
Where's the?